Free thinking is something very few people are blessed or cursed with. Let's take a look at how tragic a different way of thinking can be in a world where everything is systematic. Let's begin by understanding what this free thinking is. Free thinking means forming your own ideas and opinions based on reason, logic, and evidence, rather than blindly accepting authority, tradition, or popular belief. It involves questioning the status quo, rejecting dogma, and relying on critical thinking to form conclusions, aiming for knowledge grounded in facts and independent thought. On paper, this sounds like quite a brilliant idea. So, how would it be bad? Erich Fromm said that freedom is frightening because it demands responsibility. Jean-Paul Sartre said that a man is condemned to be free. And contrary to what we believe, life doesn't get easier when you have it. It gets harder, given your odds against the matrix. Sometimes, free will is just another pain in your back because things just don't seem to make a lot of sense. With this unhealthy polemic at hand, we'll be looking at Dead Poets Society, a movie that, in the beginning, I thought was going to inspire the whole non-free willness out of me, and it did, until it didn't. Those who have seen it understand, and those who haven't, spoilers ahead. Dead Poets Society is a story about poetry, individuality, and seizing the day, but with a twist. Before I get into the action itself and the twist, ask yourselves, is free thinking actually liberating, or is it only safe under very specific circumstances? Because Dead Poets Society is not much about inspiration, as I was wrongfully led to believe in the first contacts we had with Mr. Keating. It's about what happens when free thinking is introduced into a system that cannot absorb it, and how different people respond when they're suddenly told that they can choose for themselves. To understand why the story hurts, we need to take a look first at the world where free will is unleashed. Hellton Academy isn't portrayed as evil, but as the set of values that are known to rule the world: order, predictability, and stability. And those values are good to be cast in stone before any uncertainties are dropped through our plot. McKee says in Story that stories don't work because characters are good or bad, but because pressure is applied and dealt with correctly. And Hellton's values become our pressure points. Hellton Academy is placed as a symbol for tradition, production of certainty, and elimination of risk. None of these factors are anything remotely close to free thinking, self-expression, or general life-related exploration. And that's where we get our tango from: the stability of Hellton Academy and the destabilizing psychology of free thinking. Systems like Hellton don't collapse when challenged, they resist. They punish deviation not out of cruelty, but out of preservation. Places like Hellton are symbols for entities that don't help students discover who they are, but making sure that they never have to even consider such things. And that's where John Keating enters the story. Keating is that teacher that we dream of when we fantasize about our university days. The teacher that bends the system and twists it to fit their own reality. And in many ways, he is. At least partially. John teaches questioning, subjectivity, and relativity. The idea that meaning is something you create, not inherit. Lisa Cron argues that we connect to stories when a character's core belief or disbelief is challenged. Keating challenges the boys' deepest misbelief, that their lives are already written. But here's the uncomfortable part. Keating is not the savior, he's a catalyst. He introduces free thinking, but leaves aside a very strong point: how to survive it or control it to your benefit. He teaches how to think, but not how to negotiate the responsibility of your thoughts. He manages to awaken identity inside a system that is structurally incapable of protecting it. And this is where Dead Poets Society becomes morally complex instead of inspirational. The characters that face this shift are a handful of young boys that are in college. Rather quickly, from simply future doctors, lawyers, and bankers, they become facets of what free thinking does to a young mind. This is where it touched the deep past in me, the moments when I was younger and the reality of me and my friends were just how simple it would be to point towards jobs, study the basic thinking presented in high school, and move on to joking around, messing about, and finding out. Let's start talking about Dr. Wilson. Inspired by Professor Keating, Neil discovers who he is. He finds his passion, his voice, his sense of self, which all pinpoint to acting instead of being a doctor. Little did he know that he'll basically nail both of them 20 years down the line. But that's a side point. Here's a side that the story doesn't show in face value. Neil has no agency. Neil meets the concepts of free will, but uses them to obey even further instead of arguing with authority. He doesn't negotiate, he can't resist. Psychologists and philosophers of free will have pointed this out for decades. Choice without agency isn't freedom, it's just exposure. Neil's misbelief isn't "I want to be an actor," it's "if I discover who I am, the world will make room for it, and the film dismantled that belief quite quickly. Neil doesn't die because he dreamt, but because he unlocked a dream without the affiliated tools required to defend said dream. And this was upsetting to notice in every father-son dialogue, where Neil just froze, refused to defend his reality. Free thinking without leverage is just despair. Barry Schwartz said that freedom is just a paradox of choice, and more choice doesn't create clarity, but rather spikes up anxiety. On the same note, Viktor Frankl said in Man's Search for Meaning that meaning isn't discovered by questioning everything, it comes from committing to something despite uncertainty. Now, the counterpart. Charlie, or as they called him, Nuanda. Charlie treated free thinking as rebellion. He is loud, provocative, reckless. Jonathan Gottschall explains that we empathize with characters who externalize internal conflict because we can track cause and effect. Charlie externalized everything. He accepted punishment, he refused shame, he survived because his freedom was performative, messy but survivable. Then there's Todd, the quiet one, the hesitant one, the boy who doesn't announce his transformation, and that's one phase that one needs in order to survive. McKee argues that sustainable character changes happen when internal transformation precedes external action. Todd doesn't perform freedom, he grows into it, slowly, internally, painfully. Todd is the only character whose free thinking is sustainable, because it develops before it's tested by the system. And after, we have these two guys. The one that's basically the symbol of redundancy when it comes to free will. The one that loves the system and will always love it, denying any other option to life. And the one that's testing new grounds due to free will's new presence in his brain. Now that you look at those facets of free will, freedom, fear, blockade, sustainability, here's something to think about when the film turns back on us. Which of these facets of free will do we see in ourselves? At various points in the movie, people may blame the school for what happened to Neil, some the father, some Neil himself because he did not stand for his own beliefs. And that makes sense, but it also seems somewhat incomplete. The system never changed, it never pretended to change. The real tensions arose when free thinking was introduced without actual instructions on how or when to use it. And that's the film's hardest truth. Freedom without support doesn't empower, it just shows weakness. And that's something so radically important to me as a memory from that poet's society. This chain of action. Taking a group of young men that are generally concerned about setting their futures, introducing them to free thinking and generally a different way of thinking, and how this type of reality can shift their lives on an endless spectrum. Psychologists studying terror management theory argue that stories stay with us when they confront meaning, choice, and identity under threat, and Dead Poet Society could be a good example for it. The destabilization of the systematic world via introduction of free thinking. The film doesn't really resolve many things within itself, it leaves a lot of interpretation. The cast is large, and some characters function more as symbols than fully grounded individuals. Some emotional transitions happened a bit too quickly, maybe somehow feeling like they're off screen. At times, the boys feel like ideas rather than people, but the insight survives and makes me question if this free will spectrum is the core of the movie, maybe they were written to be somewhat chaotic. Maybe they were meant to be happening off screen and just allow us to develop the stories by ourselves a little bit. Maybe for us to sometimes get lost in who's that guy, what's this, where's that. That's the thing though. Dead Poet Society doesn't say that systems are good or free will is good, but just places them one against each other and it's up to us to interpret. With this in mind, I may be wrong in my hectic speculations, but as we know, free will is available and everybody is entitled to their own wrong opinion. This has been Narrative Autopsy. Until we meet again.